Welcome to Suddenly Different, where we explore stories and strategies for life when it doesn't go to plan. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, inviting you to join me on this journey. What happens when the place you come to for safety, opportunity, and belonging becomes the very system that questions your worth? My guest today, Fabiola Campbell, knows this story deeply. She arrived in Australia as a highly skilled migrant woman, educated, experienced, ambitious, yet quickly found herself unseen by the professional world she expected to step into. Instead of disappearing, Fabiola turned her lived experience into advocacy. She founded Professional Migrant Women, an organisation dedicated to closing the gap between migration and meaningful employment for women across Australia. Her work champions humanistic leadership, cultural intelligence, and the extraordinary richness migrant women bring. Not despite their differences, but because of them. In her book, Own It, Fabiola speaks with remarkable honesty about the emotional, cultural, and systematic complexities migrant women face. There were parts of her book that struck me deeply. The moments where she names the quiet grief of starting over, the loss of identity that comes from being overlooked, and the powerful reclamation that happens when a woman finally decides to own her voice, her story, and her place in the world. Today, we're going to walk with Fabiola through that truth, the courage, the challenge, and the clarity she carries, and explore what still needs to change so that migrant women are not just included, but elevated. Fabiola, it's an honour to have you here today on Suddenly Different.
And it is my absolute pleasure to be here with you. Thank you so much for inviting me to come along and have this conversation and explore where this conversation can take us.
Absolutely. That's what I love, is finding the similarity in our difference.
100%, yes. That's a great place to start.
Yeah. So what do you remember most vividly when those early months in Australia, when you realised your qualifications were recognised, which is good because often they're not, but that your experience was discarded?
Yeah, I think that is a very interesting thing. I was lucky that the qualifications that I had were recognized here in Australia, which is crazy if you are a professional from the health industry, that even if you have many, many years of experience, it's like you've never set foot on an operation room or a consulting room, or or if you're a dentist, if like you haven't worked or done anything, when really we have the same human anatomy. So I'm not talking about that. I think it's a big issue that we bring professionals to Australia with amazing qualifications, and we don't give people the opportunity to validate those qualifications in an easy way, because there are ways, but there are more hurdles than ways.
Yeah.
I was one of the fortunate ones to have qualifications that were accepted here in Australia. So I graduated as a criminologist in Venezuela, and I did work in crime prevention.
Right.
I think to just also provide some context, my English wasn't good when I came to Australia. So that was the first hurdle that I have to overcome. And well, I wouldn't say that was part of the discrimination, because that is about personal responsibility. If you want to have a professional job, you have to have a level of English that is congruent with the level that you are aspiring to have. So, I did spend 3 years leveling up my English skills in order to feel or to be ready to take that step into the professional market. Now, the interesting thing, and this is one of the most common things that people quote or migrants quote when they apply for jobs is, you're very good, but you don't have local work experience. To me, that is a massive cop out, and something that we really need to address because, on the one hand, migrants come to Australia with the promise that their skills are highly sought after. A lot of people put their livelihoods on the line to make the move. And when they come here, they find all of these barriers, even when they are proficient in English, But I also noticed that it depends on what kind of English you speak. Is it English from the UK or from South Africa or from India, or from the US?
Okay.
So not all English speakers are the same. So I think, again, one of the first hurdles is not having local work experience. And the other hurdle that I think is huge for migrants is the loss of social capital. And what do I mean by this? In our countries of origins, our identity is constructed by the different meanings that we attach to it, right? So when we were little, we were the daughter of, or the sister of, or the niece or nephew of, and so on. So our family creates some context. But also, maybe I am the neighbor of, or I went to school with, or I went to certain school, again, and that provides some context that start shaping your identity. When you apply for this first job, in your CV, you have your university degree or what university you attended and so on. And all of that carry some meaning that, again, fits and shapes your identity. But when you move countries, all of that meaning disappears, right?
Yeah.
So sometimes people don't even know where your country is located, let alone your university or the organizations where you worked. And maybe they are very reputable organizations in your country of origin, but they don't mean anything to people in Australia or in any country for that matter. The qualifications are not recognized sometimes. Experience is not recognized. And it seems that it's really hard for people to find paths to close that gap.
Yes, my acupuncturist Chinese medicine doctor, she arrived from Portugal and had very, very limited English, but extremely proficient in her space. Well, she had to achieve a level of English that none of people who live in Australia, it's a much higher level of English that she had to be proficient in before they would let her work as a doctor of Chinese medicine. So the good thing is she appears to have done it now.
Amazing.
It's debilitating because the level of English isn't the same English that adults who've gone to school here have to have.
Yeah, and if you think about it, I mean, of course, you expect that a professional and a health professional has certain level of English. It's very important. In her case, English wasn't her main tool. Maybe certain level of communication she could achieve without being in the top ranks of the language in general. So again, we're missing out on amazing professionals because we have rules that are so rigid that make us lose opportunities with the capital that we already have here in the country.
That is really disappointing and something that most of our listeners would not know, right? They just wouldn't know. And so it's something that we've got to look at, as you said, the pathway for recognition of the experience, as well as the
local work experience.
ensuring that there isn't a prejudicial bias, an
Absolutely.
unconscious bias in the decision-making process. So in your book, Own It, you speak to the emotional cost of not being seen. Which parts of that journey still sit with you today? So it's the identity part, but are there other elements?
Yeah. So the way I wrote the book on it is about exploring the underlying emotions of my migrant journey and to really look under the hood and start naming them. I do believe that when you are able to articulate your emotions, you become more competent, more emotionally competent. But also you understand as well, or one of the things that I've learned during this process is that emotions are messages. They are not necessarily a state that you have to be in. So, for example, what used to happen to me is that I was carried away by certain emotions, and I still do it. But nowadays is with more awareness. So I was carried away by certain emotions, and I just didn't know what was happening underneath. And maybe I just ignored the core of that feeling. And just by doing that, I kept looping into that cycle, and I was getting stuck within that emotion. Now, throughout my whole journey, when I started to identify, so first of all, detect when you have an emotion, a reaction in your body, you say, okay, something is happening here. What is it? Like, okay, the alarm starts to ring, ding, ding, ding. Let's pay attention, right? And then the next thing for me is to explore that emotion. What is it? What am I feeling right now? Am I frustrated? Am I angry? By the way, anger is usually an emotion that indicates that there's something deeper below. So it's a manifesting emotion, but something is an indicator that there's something else that is not being addressed or it is unresolved. And what I discovered under that anger was usually shame, fear, frustration. And when you are able to differentiate between those emotions, you are more capable of addressing the root causes and the needs that goes, underneath that. And, there could be many, many different emotions. But naming those emotions are an integral part of getting unstuck and asking yourself, well, I'm feeling this, then what do I need? What is this emotion trying to show me? Yeah. What I did in the book was to explore those emotions with different stories that I experienced and provide some context so people could also see themselves reflected in that process that I experienced.
And emotions are such interesting things. And on my study over my lifetime, I've worked with different teachers who say that when we feel an emotion for more than 60 seconds, then there's a story attached to it, right?
Love it.
It isn't just the emotion. Now, and we reinfect ourselves by telling the story over and over again. And then we see in the world around us the same problems that support the story, that bring the anger or bring the tears or bring the laughter, whichever. We see the patterns in the world. And it is for everybody on the planet. It is so important that we look at our emotions. We decide there's more than 2 or 3, and we name them and do some self-discovery to find, where does it come from? What is it? Why What is that person doing with their face that's triggering me to behave like a 4-year-old, or what is it? So I think it's wonderful that you've explored that and explained that in your book with stories and anecdotes that help others get greater understanding of what might be happening for them.
Yeah, yeah.
So many migrant women carry invisible grief, which, of course, the grief of leaving, of starting again. Well, there'd be loneliness, being misunderstood. It would be so hard to leave your family and leave your culture. So how did that grief show up for you?
I think that's a very interesting question because I think grief, yeah, that sense of loss shows up in different ways. Shame was one of them, the loss of agency, the loss of fluency, autonomy was really frustrating. And, I came here as an adult and I was fully independent. And so much so that I decided to move to the other side of the world by myself, right? So, but when you come to this new environment, when I came to this new environment where everything was new to me, I feel that it was like losing my superpowers.
Yeah.
All of the things that I thought of myself that were connected to language, poof, disappear in an instant. So my ability to order anything at the supermarket, for example, let alone to have meaningful conversations, or even your inability to tell a joke, something as subtle as that, but it's a big loss because all of those ways of communications make part of your identity. And when you are not able to express yourself in the way that you were used to, that causes a big loss. It's like, well, I'm not the woman I used to be, and I don't recognize this woman that I am being right now. And to me, that represented shame because I thought I was better than that, and to confront myself with the reality that I wasn't as good as I thought I was, that made me feel ashamed. But also, it's not only that, it's about the expectations that you have about the process. I was expecting faster results. And I think, to be honest, I think it was unrealistic. And that's where, the grief and the shame comes in, because then you get really frustrated. Trying to overcome all of those obstacles, trying to build that persona, that new persona, is not an easy job. And although I think that there are ways to accelerate that process, when you surround yourself by the right people, by using the right resources and so on, I think it's a process that has to be lived. And we all experience it in certain ways.
Yeah, I think I can understand, like, for me, when I had my reaction to the COVID vaccine back in 2021, 22, I became very ill very suddenly, and I had to I couldn't work and I wasn't recovering. I was getting worse and worse all the time, and I wasn't able to think and speak and do all of the things. So everything that I had accomplished, I could no longer do. So I can understand the feeling of being foreign, right? I was different. I was no longer able to do what I identified as. I couldn't even play with my grandchildren for very long, and it was very hard. I'm a lot better now, but I'm still a long way from the person that I was.
Mm.
And so it's very similar when you have a neurological problem and language is affected and confidence is affected. And so, yes, I can imagine somebody moving to a foreign land, and especially if they weren't prepared for it, like they hadn't really understood the way it is, and I don't know whether it's the same in other English-speaking countries or whether Australia is different or the same. I
Look, and
don't know.
I only lived as a foreigner in Australia, but I do have a lot of relatives living overseas and friends as well. I mean, coming from Venezuela, Venezuela is a country with 8 million people living abroad because of the situation in the country. So many family and friends are now living abroad, and they have experiences that are similar to the ones that we are just sharing now. Especially,
Yeah.
I suppose, people like that I grew up with that had similar educational background to mine, in university graduates that are not able to get to that level in a different country, even in countries where they speak the same language. So it's a big change.
Okay, right. So it can happen when language isn't the barrier.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, language is a big one. It's a
Yeah,
huge
it
one.
is. It's huge. Yeah. Yeah. And you can't learn it quickly.
No,
right?
you
As
can't.
you said, it took you three years to learn
Yes,
and to get competent, whatever competent means,
correct. Yes,
but it takes time. It
absolutely.
takes time. So there's real barriers there that are beyond simple logistical or skill sets.
Yes. Yeah.
So what do you think Australian workplaces still misunderstand most about professional migrant women?
I think that people still equate having a foreign accent to being somehow less smart, for example. It's very interesting. That's one thing. I know someone. She is an Australian woman with Indian origins, Indian parents. I think she was born overseas, but she grew up in Australia. She's a lawyer, so really competent, and she was very proficient in English and whatnot, but so was her parents. And one day her dad was in some kind of legal problems, and she was representing her dad. And she said that at that time, for the first time in her life, she realized that her dad received a different treatment to her. And it was just because of the accent. So I suppose the people in that space didn't know the relationship or why not, but he was receiving a different treatment, a more patronizing treatment compared to her. And they both have similar educational levels and why not, but one had an accent and the other one didn't. So,
and that happens in disability.
Of course.
Right?
I mean, that's even more obvious. Yes.
Right? So that if you're in a wheelchair, people speak to you as though you're not cognizant.
Yes.
Relationship between wheelchair and brain function is not always direct, right? And so, and like for me, I lose words and may lose train of thought, and people finish my sentences for me.
Yeah.
So people are impatient.
And sometimes it's well meant, but I think we need to allow space, for others to express themselves.
Yeah. And I think in my view, when somebody has a different first language than English, and they then speak and do a presentation in English. So I've got a close friend who spoke Afrikaans, and he would stumble and stutter a little bit. But the reason was he was thinking in Afrikaans and then translating it to English on the fly, which is so intelligent and so amazing. We should be even more respectful for somebody who is thinking in one language and speaking in another.
Yeah, well, that would be really nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a long way to get there. And it's also a two-way street, We have chosen to come and live in a country that speaks a different language. So we certainly have to put an effort in
Yeah. Yeah.
learning the language. And this day, I don't care about my accent anymore. I know I have an accent, and to be honest, there's very little to none that I can do to get rid of my accent. But nowadays, I don't want to.
No.
And
There you
I
go.
instead Yeah, and instead I focus on the things that I can control. So I can learn more vocabulary. I can improve my grammar, can improve my writing skills, and so on. So those are things that I can improve and I can control, and those are the things that I focus on. But that doesn't reflect my accent. Doesn't reflect my level of intelligence, and that I think is something that a lot of workplaces could improve. To have that understanding and that openness.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because the other thing is that, it's a known fact that diversity also brings more profit. But when we talk
Yeah.
about diversity, it's not only, cultural diversity, of course it does, but it's diversity of thought. And diversity of thought
That's
usually comes.
the most important thing is the diversity of thought. It is not about how you look. It is not about what you wear. It doesn't matter. Thinking differently creates brilliance.
Yeah, agree. So I suppose that, that diversity of thinking for migrants come with different cultural experiences, different global views, different upbringings, and that's what creates the magic. But
That's right.
again, that can be said for any other group or community that is different from the mainstream group.
Yes, because we group people into so many different categories that you can slip into a minority really easily. Then people in their busyness in getting business done, they can be just saying, look, I'm really just looking for this person who has this experience, went to this school or this range of schools and did, and it's limiting, definitely limiting. So there's such exhaustion in trying to fit in to structures that weren't designed for you. Actually, they weren't really designed for anyone.
Mm.
They just happen along, right? And what was the moment you stopped trying to fit in and started advocating and using your beautiful voice to make a difference in this space with this issue?
Yes, I think for me it was a point of recognition, as in recognizing myself in somebody else. So what is known as representation. So I remember I was attending a leadership conference for women, and we have a full day of wonderful speakers, all of them Anglo-Saxon women.
Yes.
But the last person, the keynote speaker, was a woman of color. Her name is Maria Misa. She's wonderful. Now, here's the interesting thing for me. I knew straight away that she was different to everybody else that have spoken on the day. And I felt a very important connection to her. I identified myself in her. And the interesting thing is that she's an African woman. She's Muslim, so she covers her hair. Her English is her first language. She is black. So if you put us together, you might say, oh, but you don't have anything in common, right? Other than that she wasn't the typical Anglo-Saxon Australian. And that for me was transformative. For me, there's a before and after that day. And I have told this story so many times, and that's one of the stories in the book, because that moment of representation, of recognition, really made a change for me, made an impact. And because of that, now I advocate for making this platform even bigger, so we can have diverse voices and diverse looks and like a really wide representation of what it means to be a woman or a migrant woman or a professional migrant woman in the case of our organization.
Yes. Well, that sounds really, really interesting. And I know that it is so important to recognize someone on TV, on the stage, to be able to relate to somebody and really connect, to see your pains and struggles as well as your joys and triumphs. It is like, that's why I spend a lot of time involved with the Women Economic Forum that just was in Melbourne. The diversity in that room, Anglo-Australian women were the minority.
Mm.
And why they weren't there, I don't know. But it was really interesting because I learned so much from everybody else.
I think it's not about othering people or groups.
Mm.
I think it's about having representation of what makes our population in here in every aspect of our communities, right, and our society. So I feel that it's all about inclusion,
Yeah.
making sure that we have diverse voices around the tables where we are making decisions.
Yes. Do you think the problem's about a lack of cultural intelligence in that there isn't necessarily a space in modern Australian workplaces where they get to have time to get to know each other's cultural differences? I know where I used to work, we had a large cohort of Chinese people and a large cohort of Indian people, and we would celebrate the major festivals, which was beautiful because we got to know more about it. But I'm sure there was still minorities that we didn't learn about.
How can I think that ignorance is something that we all have in abundance, right? So I can't just blame one portion of the population of being ignorant about something. I mean, I'm ignorant about many cultures, yeah? And realizing how ignorant I am, I can understand how other people will be ignorant about my own background or different backgrounds, right? I also understand that I don't have the time to learn about everything and every background, right? So from that point of view, I think it's very understandable, right? Mm-hmm. However, I think there are things that we can actively do as organizations. There is a power to influence some of these dynamics, and are things like the ones that you just described. So having cultural days of significance, like Chinese New Year or Diwali for Indian communities, or different traditions across different cultures, right? And share. I think one of the biggest tools that people can use to build bridges is curiosity and the sharing of stories. I read somewhere the stories are like windows or mirrors. There are some stories where you can see yourself reflected on and you can resonate with. And there are some other stories that are like windows and you can see through and you can see what other people experience. So it's not your story, but you can see what it's like. So creating spaces for storytelling and sharing culture and making it really a part of business as usual to allow for those spaces, I think is a great way to embed that culture of inclusion, but from different perspective, culturally, because that's where I speak from, but from any other perspective as well.
So if you could redesign the Australian recruitment system with one meaningful change, what could that be?
Well, I have seen some organizations doing this and doing it well in terms of providing opportunities for professional migrants, and is to provide some of these internships.
Lovely.
Most organizations have the ability to offer this, right? So if one of the biggest hurdles for migrants in Australia is to get the first job experience, the first local experience, I think that one meaningful change that organizations can do instead in the space of social impact is to provide those, 3 to 6 month job experiences where people can at least have that thing in their resume. So I have seen organizations, local government organizations, where this happens. And what happens very often is that that person continues working in the organization. Why? Because they are qualified, because they are capable, because they got given the opportunity, and an opportunity comes along and they are already in the right place at the right time. So I think this could be a really good way of opening spaces for migrants in the workplace.
That sounds like a good idea. I don't know how internships work in Australia, but I think it's vitally important that people get to have a cross-cultural experience and get to be speaking more English, be demonstrating that they understand concepts on the job and gain the confidence, right? To see the similarities rather than the differences.
Yeah, absolutely. And to be able to contextualize their experience into the Australian context. So, for example, say that I work for the biggest telecommunication company back in my country. I can say, well, I work for a telecommunication company that is similar to Telstra in Australia, for example. So people know what Telstra is and what is the reach that they have in Australia, but they wouldn't have a clue of what that company is in Venezuela. But finding the language and being able to contextualize your experience is a really good tool that you can learn, in those spaces.
Yes, yes. You speak beautifully about humanistic leadership. What does leadership look like through your lens beyond hierarchy or corporate language?
So recently I've been having conversations about power, and I also heard Brené Brown, the author, talking about the different kind of powers: power over, power with, power to, power through, and power within, which I find that is a beautiful model to exercise power in different ways. I suppose each of those forms of power have an application, but when it comes to humanistic leadership, I feel that power with, power to, and power within are very important. We have seen some very powerful leaders that demonstrate this, and they also demonstrate empathy and compassion and vulnerability, and that doesn't make them less powerful. And I think there was a model of power or leadership that we inherited that was more about power over. But
Absolutely.
I feel that even those people that exercise that kind of power, when they don't know any better, by the way, but it is a very debilitating leadership model because it could be very lonely as well. You could be the subject of a lot of judgment and criticism and dislike if you want. And certainly not one that I think is the most conducive to collaboration, creativity, productivity, and so on. So, but I don't think this is about gender, by the way. Certainly we can see the trend of power over that is more related to men, but not necessarily is a masculine thing. And I can see as well how those paradigms are changing in the leaders that I meet these days, men or women. So yeah, I feel that those are characteristics of leadership that are more humanized, because that allows us to show ourselves as people, as humans, and by doing that we create space for others to show themselves as who they are.
It's so important that we really do understand the power, that power element, and question in our own behaviour what kind of power we're using,
Yes.
because we'll be using it in different parts of our life, not just in the workplace. It'll be an unconscious way. And our children learn it, and our grandchildren learn it from us. And we don't want that
And as
anymore.
the mother of a teenager, let me tell you, it's not that I think, I was brought up with the concept of, with the model of power over. And with my son, I'm learning so much about different kind of powers or power dynamics. So, and everything is like you learn some skills here that are applicable elsewhere. So it's
Mm-hmm.
like a continuum. So
That's right. It is a continuum. And it's great to be a lifelong learner, right?
yes,
Again, that's another element of being ignorant, when we stop learning, when we
yes,
stop exploring and
100%.
asking questions.
Yes, I agree.
So one of the parts of Own It that stayed with me was your invitation for women to recognize themselves as the hero of their own story.
Mm.
When did that recognition land for you personally? When did
Well, after that encounter with Mariam, that was the trigger for me, the catalyst, if you like. But also, there is another crucial moment, in that process. I think that for many years, I was waiting for people to see me. So for others to initiate that um, dynamic, to take the
mm-hmm,
first step.
mm-hmm,
I think that the moment I reclaim my story, and that's the title of my book, Own It, was when I understood that it takes two to tango, right?
yes,
So what do I mean by this? I really, really wanted to be seen. I wanted to be accepted. I wanted to be embraced and celebrated for who I was. But for many, many years, I was just trying to fit in. I was just trying to disguise. I was just trying to appear not to be a migrant or not to have an accent or, to be as Australian as I could, Anglo-Australian.
mm-hmm,
So the moment when I embraced that part of myself, that cultural heritage, that accent, that history, and I decided to own it, that is when I reclaim my power. And I feel that, that's one of the main messages in the book. There is a quote that also inspires some of this work, and it says that when you own every part of who you are, nobody can use it against you.
lovely.
So, yeah, I think that when we allowed ourselves to thrive on the knowledge of who we are, that's the one thing that makes us unique. And I know that sounds sometimes like a cliche, but it is the truth. There's not two of you or me or the next person, right?
That's right.
So probably one of the most vulnerable things and yet courageous things that we can do is to show ourselves for who we truly are. And then we can ask people to meet us there. But we cannot expect people to meet us there if we're not putting ourselves out there. And it is courageous. It is terrifying sometimes. But it's the only way, in my opinion, that we can thrive as individuals.
I believe that is a message for everyone,
Absolutely.
that
It doesn't
it
matter.
applies. It is cross-cultural, cross-gender. It is across generations. It is so important that we meet, right? Life is a dance, and it does require us at times to take a step forward, to be seen, to be vulnerable. And through that vulnerability, we become amazing.
Yeah, we find our people.
We do. We do. So,
I can tell
and
you very quick stories
yeah,
about that in my experience. I've met a migrant woman who grew up here in Australia, who once said to me, at least you have an accent, and people realize that you are a migrant because you have an accent. But I don't have an accent, so people don't know I'm a migrant. And that was like, said no migrant ever. Most of the migrants I've met really want to lose their accent, but this woman felt that she was missing out because she didn't have an accent. I also met a man an Anglo-Saxon man that had all the ticks in the right boxes. He was white, male, Anglo-Saxon, great education, everything to go for. Great jobs, but you know what? He was very tall. And he felt that he couldn't find a partner because he was very tall, right? And he felt that he was left out. I also met a woman, and again, an Anglo-Saxon woman, who was very short. To me, in my eyes, she had everything going for her. Great family, great job, great everything. And she felt that she was missing out because she was too short. And I can tell you even more stories about that. But what I realize is that this feeling of not being enough is something that cuts across everything. And that is the thing. When you embrace that thing about you that makes you who you are, then that's when you start shining, when you show up with power, no matter who you are.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's difficult, but rewarding to do that.
Yes,
and
absolutely.
Sometimes it takes reinventing yourself multiple times in your life because our identity isn't static to
That's right.
one time, right?
I mean, as women, we might be, mothers in some stages, or wives, or managers, or grandmothers, or single women, or like your identity is not fixed, and every stage of your life will bring a new spin. So also a different opportunity to own those parts of your identity and show up as that.
Yes. So how do we make it different? How do we make it different for the people today, for the next generation of migrants who come to Australia, and build communities that embrace the cultural difference as a collective advantage rather than something to manage or integrate or, have a program for, or, how do we make it a normal thing? It's just normal.
Yes, look, I think I count myself very lucky to live here in Victoria because I feel that Victoria is a very multicultural space, and it makes a lot of effort to embed that not only in our society but also in the organizations. And since moving here to Victoria, to Melbourne, I have met people from so many different parts of the world. Through my university studies, through my work. And again, those spaces of connection happen when we allowed ourselves to recognize each other, to be curious, to share stories, for me, the greatest tool to bridge these kind of connections is food, because everybody eats, right?
They do.
Yes. So having opportunities to do that is great. And having the opportunities to do that with people from those cultures is even better. You can always go anywhere in Australia and find an international food, a restaurant with international food. But if you get to share that table from people from that culture, your experience is so much better.
Yes.
So, creating spaces for cultural sharing and activities, and taking that opportunity from the early moments at school all the way through workplaces and community organizations, I think, is a great way to go.
Yes. So if every leader in Australia was listening right now, like the podcast had gone viral, what is the one truth you want them to fully understand about migrant women and meaningful inclusion?
So one thing I would like to anybody for that matter to understand is that everybody has something valuable to share, and sometimes what it takes is to give people the opportunity to demonstrate those qualities. So opening doors, I mean, when you are in a position of leadership, I suppose that one of the biggest signs of your power as a leader is to create those spaces and to allow people from all walks of life to have a go, and to help them fulfill their potential and even more and enhance their potential and their contribution.
Yes, yeah.
So open spaces for other people different to you and appreciate their differences and their contributions. That will be my advice for leaders.
Well said. Very well said. So, Fabiola, thank you. Your story is a powerful reminder that belonging is not something we are granted. It's something we build, claim, and embody. Your voice amplifies what so many migrant women experience quietly: the loss of identity, the push to prove themselves again, and the resilience required to step into paces that weren't designed with them in mind. Yet you've shown us that when women reclaim their voice, their power, their identity, and their value, entire systems begin to shift. Your work is not just advocacy, it's transformation. To everyone listening, may this conversation be an invitation to expand your awareness, to challenge your assumptions, and to build workplaces where every woman, regardless of origin, accent, or pathway, is truly seen. Fabiola, thank you for your courage, your leadership, and your unwavering commitment to change.
Thank you so much, Leigh-Anne. It's been a pleasure to have this conversation with you. Yeah, thank you for the opportunity to be here with you.
Wonderful. Thank you. This has been Suddenly Different. I'm Leigh-Anne Sharland, and I'm so grateful you shared your time with me. If you felt a spark, a tear, or a moment of recognition, I hope you'll pass that gift along by sharing this show. Take a deep breath, trust your path, and I'll meet you back here soon.